Liberal host insults Karoline Leavitt on live TV. Trump's brutal response leaves her shaking. The studio was electric. The audience buzzed with excitement, their eyes locked on the iconic talk show stage, bathed in golden light. This wasn't just any interview. This was Oprah Winfrey's stage, a place where the most powerful, the most controversial, and the most famous came to defend themselves. Tonight's guest, Donald J. Trump, a former president, billionaire, media juggernaut, and one of the most polarizing figures in modern history. And sitting across from him, Oprah Winfrey, a media titan in her own right, a woman whose influence stretched across generations. This was more than an interview. This was a battle of legacies, ideologies, and power. The cameras zoomed in as Oprah leaned forward, her practiced smile in place. "Donald, welcome to the show." Trump nodded slightly, flashing that signature smirk, his hands clasped in front of him. "Thank you, Oprah. Always a pleasure." The crowd chuckled. There was a tense politeness between them, like two poker players, sizing each other up before the first hand was dealt. Oprah didn't waste time. "Donald, you've built an empire, led a country, and remained one of the most talked about figures in the world. But let's be real, your leadership has been divisive." She let the words hang in the air. Trump simply tilted his head. "Divisive?" he repeated, a slight smirk on his lips. "I'd call it effective." A few members of the audience chuckled. Others shifted uncomfortably. Oprah leaned in. "Let's talk about your influence. You've reshaped the Republican Party, turned politics into a spectacle, and now you're backing some of the most controversial figures in the country." She clicked a button on her teleprompter, and a large screen lit up behind them. A photo of Karoline Leavitt appeared poised, confident, and smiling. A young, rising conservative star, known for her fierce loyalty to Trump and unyielding stance against liberal media bias. Trump's eyes flicked to the screen. He knew where this was going. Oprah's voice softened her signature move before landing a tough question. "Karoline Leavitt, a woman you've openly supported and called out the future of conservative leadership." She paused, letting the audience absorb it. "She's young, ambitious, but let's be honest, Donald. She's not exactly what most people would consider seasoned for politics. Do you really believe she's ready?" The room went still. The undertone in her voice was clear. She wasn't questioning Karoline's experience. She was questioning her legitimacy. Trump sat back, folding his arms. The crowd waited. Would he take the bait? Would he snap back? Or would he do what he did best, flip the script? Trump's voice was calm, measured. "So let me get this straight, Oprah." He gestured toward the screen, his eyes sharp. "You're sitting here on national television, questioning Karoline's ability because of her age." Oprah's smile didn't fade, but her eyes flickered a tiny reaction, barely noticeable. Trump pressed on. "Now let me ask you something, Oprah. If Karoline were a young liberal woman running on your platform, would we even be having this conversation?" The audience gasped. The shift was immediate. Oprah opened her mouth, but Trump wasn't done. "Because let's be real, if she were a Democrat, you'd be calling her empowered bold the future of women in politics." He leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "But because she's conservative, she's not ready?" That's interesting. Oprah adjusted in her chair, visibly recalculating. This wasn't going how she expected. She had come in as the interviewer. Now, she was the one on defense. She gave a small, practiced chuckle. "Donald, that's a bit of a reach, don't you think?" Trump shrugged, unfazed. "Not at all. You see, Oprah, I've been in this game for a long time. I know how it works. When a conservative woman rises, the media treats her differently. They attack her for things they'd never attack a liberal for." He pointed toward the screen again. "Karoline has worked hard. She's earned her place. But the second she steps forward, what happens? People like you go after her, not for her policies, but for her existence." The audience was now split. Some nodded in agreement. Others whispered, shifting uncomfortably, because deep down they knew there was truth in what he was saying. Oprah's posture straightened. She wasn't done yet. "Donald, you're known for being blunt, for pushing boundaries. But isn't there a danger in promoting figures who might not be ready for national leadership?" Trump smiled. "Because now, he had her exactly where he wanted." Funny, Oprah, because I don't remember you asking that question when Barack Obama ran for office. Boom. The audience gasped again. Oprah's expression froze just for a second. Trump leaned in slightly. He was young. He was inexperienced. And yet, The media hailed him as a once-in-a-generation leader. He spread his hands. So tell me, what's the difference? The silence in the room was deafening. Oprah had underestimated him. She had expected a defensive Trump. Instead, she became a calculated strategist, a master of flipping narratives. And the audience, they were seeing it in real time. Oprah wasn't in control anymore. Trump was. And the interview, it was just getting started. The energy in the studio had shifted. Oprah, the master of interviews, had lost her footing, and she knew it. Donald Trump sat across from her, calm, composed, in control. He had flipped the script on her attempt to discredit Karoline Leavitt, turning the conversation into an expose of media hypocrisy. And the audience? They weren't sure whose side they were on anymore. Some still clung to Oprah's authority, but others? They were leaning in, watching Trump dismantle one of the most powerful figures in the media live, in real time. This wasn't just an interview. It was a battle for narrative control. She took a deep breath, her fingers lightly drumming against the table. She needed to regain control fast. Donald, let's get serious for a moment. Her voice was softer now, measured. The crowd settled, sensing a shift in tone. You've built your career on challenging the establishment. But don't you think, at some point, experience has to matter? She gestured toward the screen still displaying Karoline Leavitt's face. I mean, we're not talking about a business executive or a media personality. We're talking about someone who could potentially influence national policy. She let that sink in. This was the trap. If Trump argued that Karoline was ready, he'd be accused of blind loyalty. If he hesitated, the media would pounce, turning it into a headline, "Trump doubts his own candidate." But Trump wasn't an amateur. He saw the setup a mile away, and he had the perfect response. He leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. Then, in one smooth motion, he turned to the audience. "Let me ask all of you something." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. They weren't expecting to be pulled in. How many of you think Joe Biden is the sharpest guy in the room? Scattered laughter broke out. Even some of Oprah's loyalists smirked. Trump nodded. So let's be clear. We've got a sitting president who sometimes forgets what state he's in, but Karoline Leavitt, a brilliant, hardworking, sharp as a tack conservative, is somehow not ready. The audience stirred. Trump turned back to Oprah. "Help me out here, Oprah. What's the benchmark for ready these days?" Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like the media's definition changes depending on which side of the aisle you're on. Boom. Another hit. Oprah adjusted in her seat, a flicker of irritation flashing across her face. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. A woman in the front row nodded slightly, arms crossed. A man, a few seats back, whispered something to his wife. And Oprah? She saw it. The seed of doubt had been planted. She had expected loyalty from her audience. But tonight, some of them were thinking, and in media, that was dangerous. Her eyes flicked back to Trump, a new strategy forming. If he wanted to talk about standards, fine. She'd take it somewhere he wouldn't expect. She leaned forward, her voice lowering. "Donald, let's talk about women in politics." The crowd perked up. This was Oprah's territory. "You've supported Karoline, but let's be real, your track record with women in leadership is complicated." The audience stirred again. Trump remained still. "Here it comes. You've made headlines for comments about women in the past. You've been accused of undermining them, belittling them. So why should people believe that your support for Karoline is anything more than political convenience?" She sat back, crossing her arms. It was a bold play. The crowd waited. And then Trump smiled. "That's interesting, Oprah." His tone was smooth, almost amused, because I remember when you praised me for hiring women in my companies. I remember when you said I was one of the first major business leaders to give women executive roles before it was trendy. The audience froze. Oprah's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Trump tilted his head, feigning confusion. "Did I change? Or did you?" A murmur spread through the room, because that was a direct hit, a brutal, undeniable truth. She took a breath, visibly irritated now. She had to move on fast. She forced a chuckle. "Donald, you are something else." The audience laughed, but not the raucous, triumphant laughter she was used to. It was different, more hesitant, because no matter how they felt about Trump, he was winning this exchange. Trump knew it. He could feel the momentum shifting. He had dismantled the attacks. He had turned the audience against the narrative. And Oprah? She was in damage control mode for the first time in years. She wasn't leading the conversation. Trump was, and he was just getting started. The energy in the studio had shifted completely. Donald Trump sat back, confident, unmoved. Oprah, for the first time in her legendary career, was visibly on the defensive. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had planned for control for a moment that would go viral, proving that Trump was out of touch. But instead, he had flipped the script. Now, she was the one struggling to land a blow. And the audience, they were no longer fully on her side. Some were still clinging to her authority, but others, they were watching Trump dismantle the media's tactics in real time. Oprah had to act fast, because if she didn't, she wasn't just going to lose the argument. She was going to lose the room. She inhaled deeply, regaining her composure. This wasn't over. She wasn't Oprah Winfrey for nothing. "All right, Donald," she said, her voice smooth but edged with tension. "Let's get to the heart of the matter." She glanced at the screen, still showing Karoline Leavitt, the young conservative Trump had defended. "You said Caroline is the future of the movement. That's a big statement. But let's be real. Your party has a history of discarding people when they're no longer useful." The audience reacted. A few gasps, some murmurs. This was her play. Now, turn it against him. Make it about loyalty. She leaned forward, delivering the question like a dagger. "What happens when she's no longer useful to you?" The crowd fell silent. It was a brutal question, framed to make Trump look like a manipulator, someone who used people and threw them away. The cameras zoomed in. The pressure was on. Would Trump stumble? Would he hesitate? Would he give her the viral moment she needed? He didn't hesitate, not for a second. Instead, he smiled. "Oprah, that's rich." A chuckle rippled through the audience. He gestured toward her. "You, of all people, talk about discarding people when they're no longer useful?" The room frozen. The audience's eyes widened. Oprah's smile tightened, because she knew exactly where this was going. Trump leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly, making the moment more personal. "How's Dr. Oz doing, Oprah?" The air went still. A few people in the audience gasped softly, because everyone remembered. Years ago, Oprah had launched Dr. Oz's career, bringing him onto her platform, making him a household name. But the second he ran as a Republican for Senate, she distanced herself, didn't endorse him, didn't defend him. She let him take the fall. And now, Trump had just called her out on it. For the first time that night, she had nothing to say. No quip, no comeback. She simply stated, "And Trump, he went in for the kill. You lifted him up, Oprah. You gave him credibility. And the second he didn't fit your narrative anymore, you let him sink." A murmur spread through the crowd. The audience wasn't sure what to do with this information, because the truth was undeniable. And Oprah, she knew it. Trump didn't stop there. He turned to the audience, locking eyes with them. "That's the difference between me and them." He pointed at the screen behind him, Karoline Leavitt's face still there, staring down at the moment. "I don't abandon people when they're under attack. I don't walk away just because the media tells me to." A smattering of applause. It started small, then grew, because whether they liked Trump or not, the argument was unshakable. She had to do something. She couldn't let this stand. She forced a smile, shaking her head. "Donald, come on. It's not the same thing. And you know it." Trump leaned back, crossing his arms. "Explain it to me." Oprah hesitated, just a beat too long, because she couldn't, and everyone saw it. In the front row, a young woman who had nodded along with Oprah earlier was now frowning. An older man, who had clapped when Trump walked in, sat forward, intrigued. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. And Oprah? She was losing it. Backstage, producers scrambled. Camera crews adjusted angles. Social media was already exploding. The headlines were writing themselves. Trump exposes Oprah's hypocrisy in brutal exchange. Oprah stunned into silence as Trump fires back. Trump flips the narrative. Oprah on the defensive. And for Oprah's team, this was a disaster. Trump let the silence drag on. Then he leaned forward, dropping his voice just enough to make the moment even more dramatic. "Here's the real question, Oprah." She blinked. waiting. If Karoline Leavitt were on your side of the aisle, would you even be questioning her? The room held its breath because that was the moment. The question no one could answer. Oprah exhaled. She forced a laugh, but it was hollow because she knew, and so did the audience. She had already lost. The studio was dead silent. For the first time in her career, Oprah Winfrey had no response. Donald Trump sat back, relaxed, a satisfied look in his eyes. He had just flipped the entire interview on its head. Oprah had tried to frame him as a man who used people and discarded them, but he turned the argument against her. Dr. Oz, a name she wished had never been brought up, a reminder of her own double standard, one that she could not explain away. And the audience, they saw it in real time. Trump had done the unthinkable. He had cornered Oprah Winfrey on her own stage. But she wasn't about to go down without a fight. She took a breath, regaining her composure. She needed to redirect, to get Trump back on the defensive. If she didn't, this would become one of the most humiliating moments of her career. She forced a gracious smile, pretending to laugh off the tension. "All right, Donald," she said, her voice measured. "We've gone back and forth a lot tonight. Let's cut to the real question that everyone wants to know." The audience leaned in. Even Trump tilted his head slightly, curious. This was it. Oprah's Hail Mary. She locked eyes with him. Then she dropped the bombshell. "Do you actually believe in democracy?" The crowd gasped. Trump blinked just once. She had gone nuclear. This was no longer about Karoline Leavitt, no longer about media bias, no longer about her losing control. She was now framing him as a direct threat to the country itself. If this landed, she could change the entire narrative in an instant. Trump's expression didn't change. He stared at Oprah for a moment, then let out a soft chuckle. Not nervous, not surprised, just amused. "You know, Oprah, I have to give it to you." She blinked. "That's the single most ridiculous question I've ever been asked." The crowd laughed, but this time, it wasn't at Trump. It was at Oprah. She felt it immediately. This wasn't the response she had been hoping for. Trump leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make the moment even more dramatic. "Do I believe in democracy?" A pause. Then, he smirked. "More than you do." The audience erupted. Scattered applause, murmurs, gasps. It was chaos. Oprah's face hardened, just slightly. She had to regain control. "Donald, that's an outrageous thing to say." Trump shrugged. "Is it?" He gestured toward the crowd. "Tell me something, Oprah. Who's the one sitting here trying to tear down a young woman just because she doesn't fit the media's mold? Who's the one trying to tell Americans who they should and shouldn't support? Because last time I checked, democracy is about the people deciding, not the media." The audience reacted again. Oprah was officially drowning. Backstage, Oprah's producers were in full panic mode. Headlines were already taking shape. Trump humiliates Oprah in a shocking interview. Oprah loses control as Trump exposes media hypocrisy. Trump's brutal comeback to Oprah's attack goes viral. Twitter was already on fire. Clips of the exchange were being clipped and shared at lightning speed. The internet had never seen anything like this. This was no longer a talk show interview. This was a historical media event. And Oprah, she could feel it slipping away. She took a deep breath, steeled herself, and delivered one last line. "Donald, you can spin this however you want, but the facts don't lie." The audience quieted, waiting to see his reaction. Trump raised an eyebrow. "Oh, Oprah," a pause. Then, "Your entire career is built on spin." Boom. Another direct hit. The crowd roared. At that moment, the fight was over. Trump had won, and everyone in that room knew it. She exhaled. She was out of ammunition. She forced a smile, but it was thin, empty. She knew how this worked. She knew what the headlines would be. She had just lost one of the most high-profile interviews of her career, and Trump, he was already thinking ahead to how this moment would live on forever. He turned to the camera, smiling. "Great show, Oprah. Thanks for having me." And with that, the segment ended. Oprah sat stone-faced as the show cut to a commercial break. And in the next room, her team was already scrambling to do damage control. The second the cameras cut to commercial, the energy in the studio shifted drastically. Oprah Winfrey sat frozen in her seat, her carefully controlled expression slipping for the first time all night. She had just suffered one of the biggest on-air defeats of her career, and she knew it. Donald Trump, unfazed. He leaned back in his chair, relaxed, while Oprah's production crew scrambled behind the scenes. Producers rushed around, whispering frantically into earpieces. The damage was done, the internet was already on fire, and they hadn't even finished taping the show yet. Trump had won the moment, but what came next? That would determine whether this moment became just another viral interview or a full-blown cultural earthquake. Within minutes, clips of Trump's brutal comebacks started flooding social media. Twitter trends, hashtag Trump dismantles Oprah, hashtag Oprah meltdown, hashtag media bias, exposed. The conversation shifted fast. What was supposed to be a moment of Trump's reckoning had turned into a referendum on Oprah herself. People weren't just talking about the interview, they were questioning something much bigger. Was the media really fair? Were conservative women treated differently? Has Oprah lost touch with the people? Newsrooms across America were in crisis mode. Every major network had prepared a pre-written narrative, a hit piece, ready to frame Trump as defensive, out of touch, or angry. But now, they had a different problem. Trump hadn't been any of those things. He had been sharp, strategic, unflappable, and worst of all, he had put Oprah on the defensive. Producers at CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times editorial board scrambled to rework their headlines. But no matter how they spun it, the clips spoke for themselves. CNN, Trump uses media tactics against Oprah, a dangerous trend. MSNBC, is Trump's attack on Oprah the beginning of something worse? The New York Times, Trump's war on journalistic integrity, reaches talk shows, but behind the scenes, their journalists were texting each other in disbelief. They had never seen Oprah lose control like that, and that's what terrified them the most. Trump, always one step ahead, wasted no time. Just hours after the interview ended, he took to Truth Social. Donald J. Trump, incredible interview tonight. I stood up for conservative women, for free speech, and for the American people. The media tried to spin it, but the truth speaks louder than any narrative. Thank you to the millions watching. More to come. The post went instantly viral, tens of millions of views within hours. And it wasn't just Trump supporters reacting, independents, Democrats, even some of Oprah's longtime fans. People who had once dismissed Trump were now forced to ask themselves hard questions. Oprah's team was in full-blown crisis mode. Inside her dressing room, she sat at a long table, surrounded by her most trusted advisors. The room was tense, silent. A producer hesitated before speaking. "We need to get ahead of this, Oprah." She nodded stiffly, rubbing her temples. I know, for the first time in years, she didn't know how to respond. This wasn't just about losing an argument. This was about losing credibility. The interview was supposed to expose Trump. Instead, it had exposed the media. A team member suggested editing the final cut of the interview before it aired, maybe cut out some of Trump's strongest moments, maybe adjust the pacing to make Oprah seem more in control. But then another staffer interrupted. "That won't work." The room turned toward her. She sighed. "It's already everywhere. The full clips, the raw footage. If we edit it, we'll get caught. And then it'll be worse." Another painful silence. They were trapped. They could only watch as the narrative slipped further away from them. Within 24 hours, the interview became the biggest political story in America. Late-night talk show hosts scrambled to salvage Oprah's reputation. Stephen Colbert, "Trump has somehow managed to make Oprah look bad. This is like watching a raccoon win a chess match." Jimmy Kimmel, "Did Trump hypnotize Oprah?" Because that was not the interview I expected. But outside of the media bubble, the reaction was completely different. Young conservatives saw a new era of media accountability. Moderates started questioning media bias for the first time. Even some liberals were uneasy about how Oprah handled it. A national conversation was happening, one the media couldn't control. And the big question was, has Trump just changed everything? At Mar-a-Lago, Trump sat in his private lounge, watching the coverage roll in. His closest advisors were grinning. "It's even bigger than we expected," one said, scrolling through their phone. Trump nodded, smirking. "They thought they could corner me. Instead, I made it about them." Another aide chimed in. "They don't know how to recover from this. Even their own audience sees it." Trump chuckled, sipping his Diet Coke. Let them panic. Oprah had been untouchable for decades. But now, she was under scrutiny like never before. The biggest question being asked across social media, Did Oprah just destroy her own credibility? For years, she had built an image of fairness, wisdom, and empowerment. But now, she looked like just another media figure pushing an agenda. And Trump, he had made sure everyone saw it. The fallout from the interview was unlike anything the media had ever seen. Within 48 hours, it had completely taken over the news cycle. Cable networks, late-night talk shows, morning panels, everyone was talking about it, but not in the way Oprah had intended. She had hoped to expose Donald Trump as reckless and out of touch. Instead, she had exposed herself. Her empire, built on decades of carefully cultivated credibility, was suddenly under attack from all sides. For the first time in her career, Oprah Winfrey was the one being scrutinized. The biggest question in the aftermath: would the media protect Oprah or let her take the fall? At first, the biggest networks tried to defend her. CNN, Trump uses media tactics to manipulate public perception. MSNBC, Oprah holds her ground against Trump's unfair attacks. The New York Times, what Trump's disrespect toward Oprah means for America. But the problem: no one believed them. The clips of the interview were everywhere. They couldn't rewrite history. They couldn't edit out the moments where Oprah lost control. And worst of all, the public wasn't buying the spin. For years, Oprah had been untouchable. But now, she looked like just another media insider trying to manipulate the narrative. Behind closed doors, Oprah's team was in crisis mode. Inside her private office, she sat with her top advisors. The atmosphere was tense, suffocating. A senior executive spoke carefully. "Oprah, we have a problem." She looked up, exhausted. "I know." Her team laid it out brutally. Trust in her had dropped. Viewers were questioning her credibility. Young audiences, once her future, were turning on her. Oprah, once the golden standard of media, was now being labeled as out of touch. She had never faced a scandal quite like this. This wasn't just a bad interview. This was a turning point in how the public saw her. She had never lost control like this before. But now people are asking, has Oprah lost her edge? While Oprah was scrambling, Trump was celebrating. At Mar-a-Lago, he sat in a private lounge, watching the media melt down. His aides were laughing, scrolling through social media. One of them turned to him. "Mr. President, you've done it again." Trump smirked. "I told you, they can't help themselves." He knew exactly what had happened. The media had overplayed its hand. They had built up Oprah as an unshakable figure. But the moment she was actually challenged, she cracked. And now, millions of people have seen it. He turned to one of his advisors. "Let's keep this going." The next day, Trump took to Truth Social. "Donald J. Trump, Oprah tried to take me down and failed. The media's biggest icon couldn't land a single hit. They wanted a gotcha moment, but all they got was the truth. The people see through it." MAGA, the post exploded. Trending on Twitter within minutes, picked up by every major news outlet, millions of reactions from both supporters and critics. But what was most shocking? Even some of Oprah's own audience agreed. A tweet went viral. "I've been a fan of Oprah my whole life, but this interview was a disaster. She didn't come prepared." Trump O1'd her. That was the real danger. Not just Trump supporters, but regular people, moderates, even liberals who had lost faith in Oprah. The illusion was shattered. Then, something unexpected happened. Liberal commentators, people who had always supported Oprah, started questioning her too. A journalist at The Atlantic, "I never thought I'd say this, but Oprah might have just done more damage to the media than Trump ever could." A former Obama advisor on CNN. This wasn't a good look. Oprah had a chance to take him on, and she fumbled. A progressive YouTube host. "Look, I don't like Trump, but Oprah completely collapsed. She made us all look bad." Oprah had always been their icon. But after this disaster, they were starting to distance themselves. She was no longer an asset. She was a liability. This interview didn't just change Oprah's reputation. It changed how people viewed the media itself. For years, mainstream networks had been the ultimate authority. What they said was fact. But now, millions of Americans were realizing the cracks in that system. The idea that the media controlled the narrative, that was fading, and Trump had accelerated that shift. The old rules didn't apply anymore. People weren't just listening to headlines. They were watching the raw footage. They were thinking for themselves. And the media had no idea how to stop it. In a last-ditch effort, Oprah released a statement. "I regret how the interview unfolded. My intention was never to attack, but to have an open discussion. I understand the criticism, and I will reflect on it. It was carefully worded, but it was too late. People weren't buying it. The comments flooded in. You got exposed. Own it. Oprah, just admit you lost. This isn't the apology we need. The damage was irreversible. For decades, she had been one of the most trusted voices in the media. But in just one night, she had become a symbol of the media's failures. And Trump had done what no one thought possible. He had beaten Oprah Winfrey at her own game. This wasn't just about Trump and Oprah. This was a turning point in American media. For the first time, millions of people saw the media for what it was, a machine, not an arbiter of truth. And for Oprah, the fallout wasn't just a bad interview. It was the moment her empire started to crumble. And Donald Trump, he walked away stronger than ever. The media had tried to take him down. And instead, he had taken them down. What happens next? Will Oprah recover? Can the media regain control? Or has Trump permanently reshaped the landscape? One thing is clear. The game has changed forever.